Right, welcome back, and we're learning HTML. Great. So now that we know how to use an IDE and get set up with a file in your favorite location, I have an index.html created in brackets, and I'm using that as my IDE because it gives me an option to live preview. All right, so in this session, let's learn about tags, attributes, and elements, and we'll also look at what page titles are. So we understand that there are something called as tags because HTML is a sort of a place where the web page design begins. It's a way to present or structure content, but it isn't presentational. It's not about the design. That's what CSS is for. So the basic structure of an HTML document includes tags which surround content and help apply meaning to it. So let's start with the basic. The first tag that we need to have is called, and this is the only one that starts with an exclamatory mark after the comment. This is how we comment. This is called a comment tag. And the first line on top is we call a doc type, and we type HTML. It's a document type declaration, and it helps the browser know on which user opens your web browser that which flavor of HTML we're using. In this case, it's HTML5, and it's very important to stick to this. If you don't, browsers will assume that you don't really know what you're doing, and you cannot, in the end, control the way a browser is going to behave. So to get back to point, so we type doc type HTML, and that we let browser know that, hey, this is HTML. And then the next immediate tag is usually called HTML. And this has an opening tag and then a closing tag with a forward slash. Opening tag that kicks things off and tells the browser that everything in between these two elements, note the word, it's called an element, with a closing tag in it. The stuff between that is what it has to render on the browser, and that's called HTML. And inside of this there is a body tag, and the body element is the main content of the document that will appear in the browser. So everything from the navigation bar all the way to your footer is included inside of the body tag. Great. So the body and the HTML, these are usually the last parts of any web page. They put a close to the respective elements, and it depends on whatever browser you're using. You might be, I mean, not the browser, I'm referring to an IDE that you might be using. They automatically end the tag. So for example, I create a paragraph tag, it ends with a paragraph. So I don't need to type the ending tag, but I just type the start, the beginning of the element, and the ending is taken care of. Now tags, another important part of a tag is called an attribute. So we learned what a tag is. This open and closing are tags. Inside of that is an element, and there's a beginning and there is an ending to those. But there's also something called as attributes, which are extra bits of information. Attributes appear inside the opening tag, and their values sit inside quotation marks. They look something like this. This is just as an example. So for example, I'm going to take the paragraph element, and then I'm going to add an ID, and which is an attribute, and I give it some sort of a value. And then I type, this is a paragraph. We'll come back to understand why we gave this attribute an ID name value. We'll come back to this because we'll be using this to manipulate the DOM on the JavaScript. We'll talk about that later. But just remember that this is an attribute. This has got nothing to do with the HTML itself, but it's something to do with indicating other design elements like CSS or JavaScript or jQuery or anything else to manipulate this particular element. So that's an attribute. And tags tend to not do much more than mark the beginning and ending of an element. And elements are the bits that make up the web pages, as we know. So there are a lot of elements that we're going to cover. For example, everything between the body is an element. So let's see how this whole thing looks. I'm going to add a h1 element, which is short for first header, and this is my first heading, and then this is a paragraph. So I have a paragraph and a heading inside the body. I'm going to click the live preview button, which will fire up a favorite browser, and then this is our first page. Now there you go. This gives you a live preview of whatever you've typed in your HTML, and we've created our first heading and first paragraph. So just to recap, HTML is not presentational, but it's a way to structure content, and we have something called as tags that help an element open and close, and in between those tags is what we call an element, and elements have some form of an attribute. So that's all you need to remember in this course, and let's come back in the next session. We'll learn some more. See you around.